healthcare is an industry that really has a direct effect on human beings.
When the system fails to function well, there can be a huge price that a patient pays.
Current procedures that they have in place and current technologies that they have in place would not catch the type of attacks that are being done today, and much less the ones that are going to be done in the future. And a good example of that is, if I'm a medical worker, I'm a nurse, right? I have access to a system. And if I get hacked, they have my credentials, they have my password, and they're using that to access the same information, right? So now, how would you catch that? Because it looks like it's a legitimate user. It's Nurse Brandy, but it's not. And how would you know that it's not? Just some lonely hacker who just hacked into a system. Then you get into the areas of like what we call trolling, which is just mess with people just because you can, right? And it's the internet.
When I'm treating a patient in the hospital and all the information is in digitized format, or in other words, there's no paper backup, what if that system all of a sudden doesn't work properly? I have a patient in the ICU that has all kinds of monitoring information. They have blood work information. They have x-rays that might have been done, CAT scans, MRI scans. There may have been a consult by another service that saw the patient yesterday and I want to read their report. If I'm looking at a computer monitor and all of a sudden that monitor goes blank, and if that medical record is disrupted, contaminated, stolen, then we don't have access to that information to be able to provide the care that's essential to best serve the patient.
From the cyber terrorism side, the motivation, again, is usually to damage. Cyber terrorism, when it comes to healthcare, is really a very scary thing because the motivation is to directly affect human lives. And what better critical infrastructure exists than healthcare to affect physical lives?
For one, you've actually disrupted the system, and you've also hit the place where people that are sick could go. So you've actually accomplished several things at the same time, I think making it a very viable target for a terrorist to attack.
The motive of money is generally stealing people's identity. Beyond that, then you have patient data, medical data, and that could be used and monetized potentially in different ways too.
By ransoming the information, for example. They may want to create havoc by disrupting things like changing the decimal point on every drug prescription in a hospital so that you're getting 10 times or 1/10 the dose of a drug, and they could corrupt the entire pharmacy system.
And if you're modifying data on that medical chart, then somebody's going to be given a drug they shouldn't be getting.
So there's a lot of potential incentives for someone to do that, either on a small scale terrorist attack or even a larger scale attack by a country, would certainly put cyber in a potential war kind of situation.
Most people don't realize just how, let's just say, easy it can be to get people's information just with the right knowledge. You put on top of that the right infrastructure, meaning whether that be a foreign government or whether that be a terrorist group or whether that be a group of 5 hackers somewhere. You combine that kind of knowledge, it's inevitable that you will get hacked. And then the question becomes, how early do you detect that you've been hacked, and how quickly can you respond to it?
If you look at nuclear weapons, for example, in the late 1940s and the early 1950s, I equate what we see in cyber today as being that 50 years ago. So it's going to change over time. We're going to be able to use cyber to control all kinds of physical things. Pacemakers, for example.
Well, they receive input wirelessly. So you could actually tell a medical device that's been implanted to do something that would potentially kill somebody.
And that makes it much more scary because now you can not only disrupt data, but you can actually disrupt physical systems.
Healthcare is ultimately still a major infrastructure, just like water and power, just like all these other things that we have to have on a daily basis, so is a hospital.
My concern is a black swan event, which is basically a low probability, high impact situation. These are the things that scare me the most, especially if they're done in conjunction with other types of attack. If there's a disruption in the electrical grid and all of a sudden electricity goes down, there are backup generators which will be activated that are on battery power. But unfortunately, those generators don't have a huge amount of time that they can function, generally less than a day.
There's other scenarios like, what if there was a physical terrorist attack? All the hospitals near that location, especially the emergency hospitals, if their computer systems were down.
And terrorists, our enemies, want to do something to disrupt our way of life.
And usually that means the loss of life or financial impact. For example, insurance companies. If you were to actually target healthcare as a whole as an organization and actually shut down that industry entirely by affecting, for example, the financial transactions between insurance companies and the providers, that could be devastating to the industry as a whole.
We're trying to understand the vulnerabilities of a system as accurately as we can from as many perspectives as possible.
But we have to try to get not really ahead of it, but like I said, we have to get ahead of the detection. We have to be able to detect the potential threat earlier. Right now, we're just way too far behind.
Once we have that information for the healthcare system of Los Angeles, we can start looking at what we can do to make that system less vulnerable to interruption.
This is literally what now runs our lives, and all of our critical infrastructure and environments run on computers. So we really have to, make it the forefront of our thinking that security is the first thing that we have to deal with.
We have somewhat of a problem now, but in the next decades, the problem will get bigger and bigger and bigger as a balance between the offense and the defense. That balance is going to sway one way or the other depending on whether we're proactive at dealing with it or our enemies are more proactive at dealing with it.
The issue of being proactive is one that most organizations are not really doing. They are reactive, and unfortunately that's just the way cybersecurity has worked. Is that a major incident or event takes place, and then we react to that event by putting something to prevent that from happening again.
We have to understand the perceptions of vulnerability before we can adequately attack those perceptions, correct the vulnerabilities in as efficient a way as we possibly can, and then reach a point where the system can function with a certain amount of confidence that it's not going to be disrupted very easily. We can't completely stop all this, but we can make it as secure as we possibly can by being intelligent and comprehensive in how we evaluate the system itself and its vulnerabilities.
We have to look at it again from a much broader perspective and make sure that we're addressing not only the technologies, but the process and the people involved.
If we don't get a handle on this now, we may get behind in a way that we'll never be able to catch up. So we have to be able to address this insecurity in cyber as quickly and as efficiently as possible now.
It's more about resilience. It's not really about security. It's about building resilience. So when something does happen, to being able to operate while still being affected by something that you just can't stop. That's the truth.